to the stage Tom Steyer. I am Sarah Golden. I'm an Executive Director at Verge and VP of Climate Tech at GreenBiz. And I am delighted to be joined here by a man that I have tremendous respect for, who wears many hats. Tom Steyer is a billionaire hedge fund manager, a philanthropist, a climate tech VC, a former presidential candidate, and now also a published author. So Tom, welcome to the GreenFin stage.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start out by talking a little bit about your book, Cheaper, Faster, Better, How We Win the Climate War. Tell me, what is this book about?
Well, I was very interested in writing a book to try and reframe the way we think about the climate crisis and the climate opportunity. And I felt as if in the United States, even though people pushing for decarbonization and pushing for clean energy have all the facts on their side and all the morality on their side, we aren't winning the argument. And I felt like it's really important to rephrase this, because what it's going to take is an all-of-society response. So there has to be a way to talk about this so that people can come together around the idea that solving this problem is not eat your gruel, it's not the world is terrible, it's this is a great opportunity for America and for Americans. And that this is not a sad story. Hopefully this book is pleasant to read, God forbid, actually a book that's fun to read, but also that there's a message in it that is optimistic and hopeful, because I'm optimistic and hopeful. And I think that, I wanted to get away from two ideas. One is, it's a fossil fuel economy and it always will be. That's baloney. And two, we're destroying nature. We're in a doom loop. There's nothing we can do about it, so let's just be depressed together. Also, complete baloney. And so I wrote the book to try and put forward what I see as the truth of what's going on in the world and the truth of how great a chance this is for us as a country.
And thank you for writing it. I admit that I have recently been, I have some to that doom loop myself, and I find this book to be incredibly hopeful and constructive and solutions-oriented. So I appreciate you putting it out there. I wanted to talk about a couple of more points within this book. One is the idea that renewables and climate tech is winning in the market. So could you quickly share what that's about?
Just to give a couple examples, I don't think everybody, assume the people in this audience actually know that renewable energy is the cheapest energy in the world. In 2023, new electricity generation globally, 86% renewable. Why did people around the world do that? Because it's cheaper, faster, and better. No one was doing it to be nice. Everyone was doing it because it's a better deal for them. And that's what we have to accept, is that's the world we live in. People are making self-interested choices, and we have to make sure that they make good self-interested choices. I would say when we look at multiple industries, multiple opportunities, what we're seeing in electricity, we're seeing around the world. So as somebody who spends his time as an investor looking at business-related questions about what's going to work and what's going to succeed, we are winning very substantially across the board. And the things that need to get done are being approached. And I'm a big believer that in terms of the technologies, we're going to win, no question. So I feel as if when we look at this, we have to accept that it's not that we're going to win, we are winning. We are going to win. The question is how fast.
So I would love to stay at this point a little bit. For the last several years, I have also been sharing this point about, well, the levelized cost of energy is lower when it comes to renewable than any form of fossil fuels. And you just cited that figure, 87% of new generation last year being renewable. I believe about 80% of that is in China, which is also not a capitalistic system. They aren't working on the same playbook that we are here in America. And I've been seeing this equation be a bit complicated recently. And there's also a book that recently came out about the same time as yours that is making the rounds right now, which is actually called The Price is Wrong, which is by Brett Christophers. And I'm not going to stay on this book long, but the point that he's making is that it's not about price comparison of the technologies, it's about profits. And what we've been seeing is that it's been harder to make profits in renewables, and as a result, there's been sort of a pullback on some of these plans. And this idea that people don't invest in a solar farm because it's the cheapest form of generation. They invest or don't invest based on whether it's profitable. And so we've seen some of this like reflected. I've seen the IOCs, and I've seen oil companies, and I've seen different companies that have made clean energy commitments and renewable commitments in the last few years pull back on those commitments, and in many cases with the insistence from shareholders that are wanting to see a larger return. And I don't think they're doing this because they love oil. I think they're doing this because they love money. And so I'm curious how you square this moment that we're at and sort of this complication around profits and what that means for renewables.
So I'll make 3 quick points. One is, in a commodity business, you make more money if your costs are lower, period. So if you think about it, the way commodities work, it goes to a market clearing price, and basically it's the marginal cost of that commodity. So if we can produce solar and wind much cheaper than oil and gas, which we can, and that advantage will increase, and we can sell it at the same price, then it should be a lot more profitable. So that's the first point. We're talking about electricity, and there is so much more to decarbonization than just electricity, which is what we tend to think about. But let's stay on that topic for now. The second point is, there is a difference between baseload power and intermittent power. And so when we think about why people claim they need fossil fuels, it's all about, we absolutely need this really high concentration of baseload power, because otherwise we're going to have days when it's cloudy, days when the wind doesn't blow, and therefore we're going to be at risk, and we need 24/7, 365 energy. So that's the second question, as if the only way we could get baseload power is from fossil fuels. Not true. But the third point is this. You can borrow really, really cheaply on fossil fuel projects. It's kind of like, it's plug and play. The banks have done this for 100 years. They can look at a project and know, when we do it, this is what it's going to cost, this is how it's going to work. When we're done, you're going to turn it, the turbines are going to be spinning. We don't have to worry about it, it's plug and play. And as a result, the borrowing costs in there are much, much lower, and the amount of money is much, much higher, just because they've had 100 years to look at it, and they've got thousands of, comps to put in their spreadsheets. Let me say, I think that is insane. Because looking back over the last 100 years about energy and projecting that for the next 100 years, it literally can't happen, because the implication there is that the forcing function is economic. That in fact, we need a certain amount of electricity, we have to get it, and therefore, however we get it, that's the forcing function in terms of what's the right thing to do and what's economic. And I would argue, no, that's not true. Because the forcing function is going to be what happens to the rest of the world. The idea that we can continue on this treadmill as if nothing else was happening besides economics is wholly false. We're seeing it today in New York City. We're seeing it throughout the United States. We saw it last week in Florida. We're seeing it, I was getting the numbers of what the temperature was in Mecca yesterday, 122 degrees. The forcing function is human life, human health, and also, if I may say so, the dramatic hit to human economic welfare that we're going to see from destroying the natural world.
It's an interesting point how much we're operating in a system that was created for a different type of energy source, just how much that's actually needing to be transformed as well. And that point that you made around we are going to be reducing fossil fuels, that we will be able to get off of fossil fuels eventually.
No, not eventually. We definitely can get off fossil fuels much faster than people understand.
Perfect, yes. And in that, one of the complications I've been seeing, because for the last few years, for the last 10 years as I've been in this industry, this is what I've been saying. We have a better source of energy, and this will take the place, and it must take the place. And there's been this complication we've seen in the last couple of years, which is the insatiable demand for energy of AI. And this, for me, makes me really worried, because it's no longer as though there's ever going to be a limit where we say, okay, that's enough energy. And so my concern is as we put more renewables on the grid, that there will still be an incentive to continue to run fossil fuels to meet this demand for AI and this global race we have for AI right now. So if we increase the efficiency within a data center twofold, I don't think that's going to mean it's going to use half the amount of energy. I worry that's going to mean we're just going to do twice the amount of computing. So how do we get off of fossil fuels when we want energy?
Sarah, that is a real challenge. And I'm sure everybody in this room has thought about this, but I happen to live in Northern California, which I think is kind of the center of AI. And so I'm very aware from people in my life how intense that competition is. That there's, a dramatic, intense pressure to win in this race. And so if you think about it, I think to put Sarah's argument into numbers simply, if you assume that there are 100 units of electricity needed, it was growing really, really slowly. And therefore, if we produced 10 units of clean electricity, most of them, eight of them, 9 of them would go to reduce fossil fuel electricity. So as a result, we were not just creating clean, we were reducing dirty. But if in fact every year electricity has a need for 10% more, then what that means is if we produce 10 units of electricity, it all goes to the new electricity and we don't retire fossil fuel plants. That's really that is really the challenge here. And so there's going to be a huge challenge in terms of producing clean energy that is different and more intense than we'd expected. Absolutely, and since I live in Northern California, I can tell you that the people who are serious about this competition are deadly serious about it. People think people in NorCal are kind of low-key. Not so much. You don't build the biggest industries in the world being low-key, and they're not low-key about this. Having said which, we really do live in the real world. We live in the natural world. Watching the natural, we cannot afford to lose this fight. And the fact that there's an additional hurdle is, it's an additional hurdle, but it's by no means the end of the world. And let me say this, if you look at the numbers globally about how this is going to work out, just to put it in context for one sec, the United States is 11% of emissions, something like that. We've said we'll get it down in half over the next decade, something like that. This is shades of gray in the world. Last year, the United States went down 4%, Europe went down 4%, China went up 5%, India went up 7%, emissions in the world went up 1.1%. So even if we meet our goals, which I believe we will, and it may be difficult, but I believe we will, this outcome is going to be written in what we would think of very populous, somewhat developing world countries. So it would be India, China, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, and then Africa. But the near-in places are those Asian places because they're developing electricity and they're building up so fast. So when we think about that, it is going to be really important. And just as an example, Vietnam had 0 renewables in 2018. They now have a higher percentage of renewables than we do. People are absolutely building this. So when we think about how this is going to go, let's not over-focus on the United States because we live in the United States. This is global warming. It requires a global solution. The answers are not going to be written in terms of where the emissions happen in the 50 states of the United States.
So quickly, we only have about a minute left. One of the things I've heard you talk about is that this is inevitable, and then also that bankers, investors need to make the right decisions. So how can we ensure that people are actually making these decisions to do this in a time frame necessary?
So I think the issue that we have is, I think everybody making decisions now knows the facts. I don't think anybody's a real denier. Some people may deny for political reasons or to help their careers, but nobody's fooled. Everybody can see the facts on the ground every day. The question is, are they going to be responsible personally? So let me say this. Looking around, I know there's some people in this audience who are old enough to have gone through the mortgage meltdown. Now, did the people who were writing those mortgages that basically took this economy and trashed it know that they were writing bad mortgages? Yes. They absolutely knew. Did they think that they were going to be held responsible, or did they think that they were going to get a big old bonus at the end of the year? They thought they were going to get a big old bonus at the end of the year, and to heck with everything else. So when we look at what's going on in terms of energy, the people who are making the argument politically, the people who are making the loans, they think, yeah, it may happen, but not on my watch. I know what the impacts are going to be, but not on my watch. I'm not going to pay. Now, that thinking, I describe in it from an investment standpoint, catch a falling knife. Like, it's going to be okay. I can catch this knife and somebody else will get cut. I will say in history that has never worked. You know, you think you're going to be so smart, you're going to time it. I think if you look at the mortgage market, you know, didn't exactly work out. It's almost, you look at those investments and you say, how is it possible that we can keep emitting at that level for the time period over which that asset, the asset life is expected to be? Can't. Do I think the people making the loans and the investments know that? Yes. Do they think they're going to pay personally? No. That's our issue. And that's something where it's really important that people making those decisions, that people observing that, come into the real world about where we are and what the true forcing function is going to be. The true forcing function is going to be avoiding human suffering, having an economy that works, not having people, having the ability to have home mortgages in the United States. There are so many different things that are going to bring this home in a powerful way to human beings, and it's not just floods and fires and heat-related death. It's also going to be America's savings. Basically, our savings accounts are our houses. If you can't get a home insurance, you can't get a mortgage. If somebody can't get a mortgage, they can't buy your house. Americans are going to notice that.
Tom Steyer, thank you so much for being here.
Nice to see you all.
Please join me in thanking Tom Steyer. Thank you for writing this book. It's such a pleasure.